Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. And after this 2-week hiatus, we have finally returned. Definitely was not in the States for, I think, the vast majority of the past 2 weeks. And during that time, the NFL released the schedule. And I remember the day vividly when the schedule dropped. And it was very interesting because it was almost like games at a time. So obviously, the week one almost season opener for us was revealed before the full schedule was dropped. But I think it's really good before we get into the full off season, before the second wave of free agency really kicks off, before training camp hits, that we look at the schedule, we look at maybe where some of the better matchups are, maybe some of the worst matchups are, see if there are anything to be gleaned from how the games were kind of placed together, and if there is maybe playoff potential for this team. So a lot to get into. Glad to be back. Where do we want to start? Do we want to start in week one, or how do you want to do this?
Well, you could say that you had scheduled your vacation to be during schedule release day or a schedule release week, because you're right. They drop them in batches. Like we got all the international games and stuff like that. No international games for the Panthers this year, unfortunately or fortunately. If you don't wake up early on Sundays, you don't have to worry about that anymore. But I think we should start at the top, right? Because we got that first game probably 10 o'clock that morning. I think it was last Thursday or last Wednesday, and we're opening on the road again, and it's going to be against the Jaguars. And that's a special game because we got into the Super Bowl twice in franchise history, and both of those seasons we opened the season in Jacksonville. Obviously in 2015 when Cam starts his MVP run, and then back in 2003. But are we going to the
We
Super Bowl
didn't.
this year? Or yeah,
We
this season?
In 2003, we weren't in Jacksonville. We were in Carolina, and Dante Culpepper was benched at halftime for Jake Delhomme, and it was Ricky Prohl who caught the game-winning touchdown that game. So, great season opener there. But the last time, yes, that we did open in Jacksonville was 2015. Like you're alluding to, are these signs or premonitions of a Super Bowl run? And it's going to depend on if we can win. If we don't beat Jacksonville, it's kind of hard to make the case to make a Super Bowl run. So definitely high expectations going into the season opener. Obviously, Liam Cohen torched this defense the last time him and Evero faced off back in Tampa Bay last year. There will be a lot of good storylines. Obviously, 2 first overall picks, 2 offensive play callers that literally were in the Buccaneers building before getting hired. So just a lot of different storylines for 2 teams and franchises that started in 1995 and will constantly, I think, forever be tied together because of that.
Yeah, both Big Cat expansion teams, right? It's funny, we have a 4-4 record against them all time, so pretty even. Other than the fact that we've gone to Super Bowls, we've had an MVP. Those are kind of the only legs up we have on the Jags at the moment. But you're right, it's going to be a good test for what Evero can do with all the new defensive additions, right? Liam Cohen, I think you could say the Jags are probably a downgrade in terms of offensive infrastructure from the Bucs last season. But Trevor Lawrence is good. Brian Thomas is good. We think Travis Hunter will be good. So it'll be a good early matchup for our defense. And I think it's a good litmus test. I know it's week one and like crazy things happen in week one, but you'd like to see him play better than we played in week one last year, at least, which was what was that, a 47-10 loss or something like that. I think that was the number one EPA difference on your graph in the last since 2011. The thing that you did last season, I think it was that Saints game, but that's neither here nor there. We go on the road again week 2, but across the country to Phoenix, Arizona, where this is a bit different, right? We kind of own the Cardinals. It's not a 4-4 thing. Panthers are actually 13-5 all time against the Cardinals. And even last year, when we were beaten and battered at the end of the year, we beat them. Had to go to overtime to beat them, but we were still able to get it done.
One of my favorite memories all time growing up when remembering Panthers games, I believe it was 2007. But Vinny Testaverde was the Carolina Panthers quarterback at the time, and Steve Smith being the dog that he always was with the Panthers, pretty much told him just like, hey, chuck it up. You cannot overthrow me. And it was a defensive grudge match, a true John Fox game, so to speak. And it was a big, like 50, 60-yard touchdown down the sidelines. And it was just one of those like signature iconic Steve Smith moments where he's like, I got you. Put it up and I'll go grab it. And so exactly like you said, outside of some hiccups in 2008, and then I would say 2011, 2012, we've mostly dominated this franchise. And I don't know if it's going to change because we did it at the end of last year. The difference, I think, here when we play the Cardinals is we are going to be on the road, playing in Arizona with a time difference after being in the heat in Jacksonville. I'm very concerned that if we don't have our footing correct out of the gate and we stumble against the Jaguars, it could lead into a cascading effect against the Cardinals because they revamped their defensive line. This is not the same defense that we played last year. So I would expect completely different matchups and things that we're going to have to exploit and work on to find a way to win the game this time around.
For sure. You talked about your favorite Cardinals moment. Mine would be not the 2015 playoffs, but 2014, which I still believe we hold the record for least yard or like the least yards allowed by a team. It was like 85 yards that we allowed to the Cardinals that year, something bizarre. And that one always sticks out in my mind. It was against like Drew Stanton or Drew Slayton. I can't remember his last name. It was like their third string QB, but still less than 100 yards allowed is pretty bizarre. You mentioned it. They revamped their defense.
Whitaker, that touchdown, that will be a classic forever.
That's an immaculate grid name for like in 5 years or something. But they revamped their defense just like we did. So it's going to be interesting to see how both former number one pick QBs, both shorter QBs, can work against the revamped defenses of the opposing team. But after that, we're at home. We have our home opener in week 3. Pretty late start to have your home opener. And it's against none other than the dirty, disgusting Atlanta Falcons, who out of all of our division rivals, they have the best record against us. I'm not going to say what it is. But we kind of punched them in the mouth. It punched them in the jaw at the end of last season. So they're probably going to be looking for revenge.
What's interesting is I would say all time, the Panthers used to whoop up on the Bucs historically. Mm-hmm. And in the same breath, we would get our ass handed to us by the Falcons. It was Mike Vick in the early 2000s. Then it was Matt Ryan. And there were several games that the Panthers themselves choked away. And then there were other ones where it was a boat race and we were never in it to begin with. So just looking back at how narratives have kind of shifted, it's the Buccaneers who dominate us year in and year out. And believe it or not, the only team that Bryce Young has a winning record against are the Atlanta Falcons. So if there's a divisional matchup that I feel really confident in, or at least for Bryce Young and this team, it's going to be the Atlanta Falcons. So to have this be your home opener, I think is really fitting. This is a way to get your fan base involved because like we talked about with the Jaguars and Cardinals, as much as those two teams could end up being negatives where you don't want to necessarily lose on the road, if you're able to win those games, you're going into that home opener feeling really great about yourself. And so they go 2-0, 3-0, go 2-1 here in this stretch to open the year, I think would be really, really big for this team in terms of a confidence and morale boost heading into the kind of the mid slate of the season.
For sure. And then the other part of that is the Falcons drafted 2 first-round edge rushers. So I'll call one of them an edge rusher and one like a hybrid linebacker. Both of those guys are from the Charlotte area. So that could be a homecoming, mini revenge game for them. But it'll be interesting to see how our defense steps up against them last year because both games last year, one of them they scored 38 and then the other – I think they also scored 38 in the Andy Dalton game, but they knelt down a pick 6 at the end. So it really was like 45. So hopefully our defense is ready to step it up. And you mentioned this is a good early, kind of easy early slate for the Panthers, the first 3 games. I think that continues with the 4th game going up to New England. We actually have a winning record against New England all time, believe it or not, 4-3. And I think New England probably had the worst roster in football last year. Obviously they made some upgrades, but I think this 4-game stretch, we really have to hit the ground running starting the season this year. We can't fall behind like we have in years past. And I think that if we can go anywhere from 2-2 to 4-0 or 3-1, anywhere in that range, I think that'd be a good start for the team. But the Patriots cap off this 4-game early slate, start the Panther season.
What's interesting is that every team that we've talked about that the Panthers will face weeks 1 through 4, I would say are in a similar bucket as the Panthers, where you've been in this rebuilding, retooling process. In some cases with the Jaguars and the Falcons, you've tasted or been close to playoff kind of success or contention. And with the Cardinals and the Patriots, it's like you've been in this rebuilding phase. And it seems like this year, Patriots are probably a year away, but with at least the other 3 teams, that this is a make or break year for them. And so it will be very interesting to see like what teams are able to hit the ground running and which aren't. And are we able to play spoiler, even though we're kind of in the same bracket with these other teams? But with the Patriots specifically, I'm going to be very intrigued to see how their revamped defensive line is performing at this point. They have some interesting pieces in the secondary, their linebacking room, obviously revamp their offensive line, have some new pass catchers in Stephon Diggs and Kyle Williams. So I think the offense definitely takes a step forward, but I think in order for this team to truly be competitive and maybe be a 500 team this year, I think it really comes down to the defensive line. Is Christian Barmore able to give you significant playing time given his health conditions? Are some of the risks you took with Harold Landry and Braden Swinson, even though Braden Swinson was a 5th-round pick, do those pay dividends and are they key contributors? Those will be things that I'm looking to monitor outside of the guys that we know are proven commodities, which I would say a Keon White on that defensive line and a few other veterans have proven their worth. But it's really about, can you get a little bit more production from that unit?
For sure. This is also, it's not a revenge game for the Panthers, but Milton Williams is somebody the Panthers signed. I have air quotes going up, signed for about 10 minutes in free agency before he defected and went to the Patriots. So that's an interesting wrinkle. I think you brought up a good point that all 4 of these teams that we're going to face to start the year, and the Panthers included, all of us probably think that we're going to 4-0 that other group. Like if everybody played each other in this little quadrant of the season here. And it's just like, who can step up, who can outcoach the other group, that kind of thing. What quarterback can step up, stuff like that. Then we're back home again after the Patriots. And to me, this is when the difficult stuff kind of starts. We're going to play against Miami in week 5. We're 2-6 all time against Miami. The last 2 times we played were in Miami, and we just got boat raced both times. One of them was during Cam's kind of mini return back in 2021. And then obviously 2 years ago in Bryce Young's rookie year, we got out to a 14-0 start, and then they scored 42 straight. So both of those times, not good looks. But I think, and I was writing about the Dolphins today and what their offseason or upcoming season expectations are. I think the Dolphins are a bit weaker than a lot of us give them credit for. And I think that this is a very winnable game. It's just going to come down to, I think, what can Mike McDaniel do against our, I guess, revamped defense?
The Dolphins are banking on a Tyreek Hill from 2 years ago, and I think a healthy Jalen Waddle for this to even remotely work. There are a lot of holes on that offensive line still in terms of interior defensive line depth. Like outside of Kenneth Grant, you really don't have anybody. And it really does seem, because they were all in, especially from a cap standpoint over the past 2 years, and you're barely able to win 9-10 games, and you probably already saw your peak with at least this group. It just seems like it's going to go downhill from here. And it's not just the injury to Tua. I think you have an injury or two across the offensive line. You lose an edge rusher or two because you drafted Chop Robinson last year. So that at least gives you somebody next to a guy like Kenneth Grant on the interior to where you have some depth and some rotation there. But it doesn't seem like it's going to bode well for this team. I believe they already lost Javon Holland to free agency. Jalen Ramsey's on the trading block. So I just don't see it with this team. And for me personally, I know we disagree on what the outcome of this game is. This is a home game. I don't think they're going to have the horses to be competitive all year. And as long as we go into the game above 500, the Mike McDaniel led Dolphins suck against teams above 500. So as long as we're 3-1 going into that game, I think we come out of that with a win. But personally, I just think the Dolphins are kind of regressing to a bottom 10 finish rather than playoff contention.
Yeah, I agree with you about how they're going to finish the season. For me, it's the fact that it's still week 5. It's still probably going to be relatively warmer weather. This is going to be on October 5th. It's a Sunday at 1 p.m. So you don't have to worry about the too cold weather effect, unless we get rain, obviously, because we're an open stadium. But I think it's too early in the season for all of the pieces that are injury prone on that team to have suffered injuries. And you mentioned it. It's not just Tua. Both Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, they're starting edge rushers, pretty injury prone. They had to replace Javon Holland, and it was with 2 kind of back-end free agent moves that they had. Jalen Ramsey, you said, is on the trading block. Tyreek Hill might be as well. Like, he's been teasing all offseason that he's cool with a trade or stuff like that. Like, he quote tweets stuff about it, which is just it's wide receiver behavior. But I think it's too early in the season, and I think they'll have everybody ready and able to play against the Panthers. I don't think we pull that one out, but I really hope we do. But then after that, I think we can both agree.
What's interesting is we can see a range of, like, worst case scenario, you come out of this stretch probably like 2-3. Like, best case scenario, you're probably 4-1. And that's great. But I think really with this next game that we're going to talk about, this starts a stretch of games where it's like, okay, you don't have to win all of them, but you need to find a way to win a couple of them. And it definitely starts with this home game against Dallas, who has had our number the past 2 seasons, despite having a backup quarterback play us in last year's matchup.
Yeah, the next, I'm counting them up, 8 games, I would say, is like the really tough stretch. And it's like 8 games half the season, right? It's hard to call half of a season your tough stretch, but a lot of road games, a lot of traveling against good opponents. So this is certainly when it gets rough. But you're right. The Dallas Cowboys, we're 3-12 against them all time. You want to talk about history with the Cardinals? It's like our only wins against the Cowboys have come at like good, memorable, I should say, moments. Like, I think about the 2015 Thanksgiving game, right, where Romo throws the back-to-back pick sixes. The Cowboys were favored in that game, even though we walked into Dallas 11-0. So I'm happy we got that one. Obviously, I don't really remember us, or I might not have been alive.
Was great.
I was thinking for the playoffs in the 90s. I don't think I was alive.
We beat them again in 2003. That was the wild card game before we went on our Super Bowl run. So both times that we've won playoff games kind of in those early Panther years were against Cowboys teams.
Mm-hmm. Ending their dynasty, of course, in what was that, 96. So hopefully we can, they don't have a dynasty right now, so there's nothing to end, but hopefully we can end that losing streak we have against them. It's got to be like 5 or 6 games now. Micah Parsons has just devastated our offensive line in each matchup. The one from 2 years ago, whatever, right? That was the worst O-line of all time. The one from last year, they were mostly healthy, and he was still terrorizing them. Osa Odigizua, who they extended, was terrorizing us. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. Hopefully we can neutralize that pass rush. But then on the other side of the ball, right, they just traded for George Pickens. So you have CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens going against our secondary. I think this is going to be a tough matchup. And no matter which way you slice it, I think the Cowboys are going to walk out of the stadium with a win, which is going to be so disappointing because their fans really travel. And so if you're at that game, there's probably going to be more Cowboys fans than there will be Panthers fans, and they're going to be cheering for their team. So that'll be a disappointing one to witness, but I think the Cowboys are going to walk out of there with that one.
It's hard to see any other outcome until the Panthers start putting a different product on the field. What the Cowboys do well, we struggled to kind of work against in terms of that. Taylor Moton, Ike Ekwonu aren't, I think, equipped to necessarily handle somebody of that kind of sphere of athleticism and just body type. And so when you look at just those matchups kind of being off, the way they play aggressively on the back end creates a lot of opportunities for mistakes. And so you saw the fumbles last year against them at home that really just were drive killers. And that affects your ability to put up points. And then you look on the other side. And like you said, this is a team that was able to do work on us with just CD Lamb last year, and they're adding George Pickens. So I hate to necessarily take a page out of Bill Belichick's book, but it's like one of those situations going into that game. It's like, since George Pickens is your outside receiver, most likely will continue to be that, do you just have JC Horn on him, nullify him, and then you got to double and bracket CD with your next two best players? So I don't know what the strategy is. We'll talk about it more, obviously, as we approach that game. But it's one of those things that you're going to have a game plan to stop those two wide receivers and do it effectively. And then it may not even matter, because you could have Jake Ferguson just going buck wild. And I don't think we'd really be able to account for that with our current linebacking core.
For sure. I think the wild card here is the new head coach, Brian Schottenheimer. If I'm correct, he didn't call plays last year. I think it was still McCarthy who called the Cowboys plays. So he's a bit of an unknown. I would imagine their scheme stays similar just because he's a holdover, but we will have to see with that one. Then continuing this isn't a rough game by any means compared to some of the other ones here, but going up to New Jersey to play the Jets, it's going to be an interesting one. We are 5-3 against them all time. When we were talking about, you tried to have me come up with things I remember about playing all these teams. The only thing I remember about the Jets is the Kuechly scoop and score fumble touchdown. They are like my least memorable team to think about. When we were looking at like what's our least favorite matchup, I took it as, which game am I gonna least enjoy watching? Probably the Jets game. Like, I don't know, just seems boring to me. But they certainly have players, at least on defense and on the offensive line. So maybe they'll have some splash plays. But I don't know. That one just seems really boring to me.
So, and I just confirmed, but it was 2005, and that was probably the first year I started watching the Panthers. Between that and 2008, there were a couple, I would say, AFC teams that the Panthers like really beat up. And in 2005, we beat the Jets 30-3, and it was just like one of those things. Like, yeah, like we kick this team's butt. And there's just a feeling about that like, you're right. It's not necessarily the most memorable matchups. During Cam's tenure, the Jets games weren't necessarily the most fun to watch, but we pulled them out. They were dubs. And I think that's critical when you talk about just like what you want to see on the schedule. We'll obviously be in New York for that game. My concern are going to be for the team's health and safety on that field, first and foremost.
That's true.
And as long as we don't walk away with any severe injuries, I'm not too concerned about the outcome of this game. Again, I don't think the playoff push should be so much on this team that when we play a team that is going to be built very uniquely, especially from an offensive standpoint, with a great offensive line, a running quarterback, some interesting pieces on the outside, they could find a way to minimize mistakes, force Bryce Young with their opportunistic young defense with Aaron Glenn at the helm. And so this to me just reads trap game. And so for Panthers fans wanting to find W's, as much as we have dominated this team, this is one of those games where I could see us going into New Jersey, maybe being 5-2 or not. We would be 5-2 at this point. No, 5-1.
5-1, 4-2, something like that. Yeah.
Like if we're in that range, that's where it's like this feels like we feel good about ourselves, and it's you forget just who you are.
Yeah, it's a reality check kind of game, right? And you mentioned it once we talked about the Cowboys. Like, you really need to find wins within this stretch. Like, to me, even if this is a trap game or a reality game or something like that, if the Panthers want to take the next step, this is the kind of team you have to beat during this stretch, because coming up, I guess we can talk about week 8 now. We host the Buffalo Bills coming off of a bye. And then that's probably our hardest game, but it's not like it gets super easy after that. But as far as the Bills go, 2-6 against them all time. This is the first time they are here in 8 years. We actually won that game. It was on my birthday in 2017, week 2. It was like a 9-3 finish. You want to talk about stuff I remember about the Bills? It was that one. It's just a horrific game. Zay Jones drops the game-winning touchdown. But my takeaway with this game is, like, when we came out of the bye week last year, which I believe was week 11, we played the Chiefs, Buccaneers, and Eagles consecutively after that and came within a stone's throw of a win, right? that's the kind of thing I want to see here is like, can we continue to play like that with an improved roster and maybe try to finish at the end of the game like that? And that gives me a lot of hope. If we can do something like that, that would give me a lot of hope going through the rest of the schedule, because we don't have our bye week till week 14. We have to play multiple playoff teams in this little stretch here. Playing strong against the Bills, not necessarily winning, playing like sound, strong football against them would be huge as far as not only my hopes, but I'm sure a lot of Panthers fans' hopes would go toward making the playoffs or even just having a strong season.
What's interesting, and it will be very telling how the game against the New England Patriots go, but Drake May, Josh Allen, these would probably be some of the more mobile quarterbacks the Panthers have faced. I get that the Panthers played Jalen Hurts last year, but the best example I can provide is when we played the Chiefs, nobody accounted for Mahomes. He scrambles for 30 yards. They set up the game-winning field goal. It's over. And to me, when I look at the Buffalo Bills, the one X factor is obviously Josh Allen. And while I'm not necessarily scared of the weapons they're trotting out, I am scared of him and his ability to take off and make plays, especially on the fly. And that ability to create, I think, is really what's going to separate this game at the end of the day. Like you said, maybe we're in a stone's throw at the end of it, but we saw him will his team the wins. Arguably, you should have. Like, you lost the LA Rams game, I believe, down the stretch, but like he scored 40 plus points. He's going bucket for bucket. Then he goes to Detroit and he beats them on Thanksgiving. It's just, there are elements to what Josh Allen is just able to do offensively that I don't think Evero is going to be able to stop, even with the added talent on this team. So to me, I want to be in a stone's throw. I want it to be competitive. I'm not going to hold my breath. It's the next game that I think they don't have that blue chip guy. Like where we just talked about Josh Allen being that guy, the Green Bay Packers don't have that guy. They have a bunch of good players, but like we have a Bryce Young. We have a T-Mac now. And it's those kind of guys that if they're able to elevate, that they can just take over a game. This is that game where it's like, this needs to be the statement. Halfway through the year, you're in a rough stretch. You find a way to win a game against the true playoff contender. Like that to me is going to be the statement game through this stretch is, can you pull it off in Lambeau? And that, I think that'll really be the determinant, a true litmus test at this point.
Yeah, like you said, halfway through the season, right? On the road in Lambeau. I wish it were like a late afternoon game because just story-wise, that'd be a lot better.
Could be flexed. It could be flexed. I think at that point.
Flexed. Yeah, that's true. We have a lot of 1 p.m. games this year. Last year we had quite a few 4 and 4:30s, but 1 p.m. in Lambeau. It's going to be cold because it's in November. But yeah, good litmus test. I don't really have faith in Jordan Love or any of the players on that offense. I have faith in their play caller, but nobody scares me on that offense, like you're saying. Their defense took quite a step back last year, or not a step back from what the expectations were last year after getting a new defensive coordinator. So this would be a really good one to steal. When I think about the Packers, like they're a sneaky, I hate this team kind of team, right? There was obviously the Clay Matthews who've been watching film. That's cool. Watch this with Cam. I think about it's either 2020 or 2021 when Gerald McCoy, a longtime Buccaneer, but he was on the Panthers that year, sacks Rodgers in the end zone. Should have been a safety, but he got called for roughing the passer for doing nothing. That was a close game. We could have won that game if we got the safety and a free kick. And then obviously in 2023 on Christmas Eve, that was Bryce Young's breakout game in his rookie season. It's what was it, like 27-27, and Romeo Doubs drops a pass on the sideline and they call it a no drop, the referees, and they set up a field goal to win it. Bryce gets the ball back with like 10 seconds. And I think it was Eddie Pinheiro couldn't hit a 70-yarder or whatever it was. Either way, like I sneakily hate the Packers, so I would love to go into Lambeau and get a win there.
I think this is because one of the bars that we occasionally go out to is a Packers bar. I think it's just slowly emanated itself into your being where you just despise that fan base and that group, and the fact that they'll whine and complain about getting a franchise quarterback after their latest one is old and beyond repair. But the move on from the Packers, we come back home and it's another division game. It's actually the second one all year, which is kind of crazy to think about, that most of our division games are on the back half. And that could really be the determinant for how the season ends. But in this case, we're hosting the Saints. This is one of those situations that Kellen Moore has his work cut out for him. I don't think necessarily the Saints offensive line is terrible if everybody stays healthy. I don't think their pass catchers are necessarily bad if they stay healthy. And then if maybe their starting quarterback stays healthy. But you see how everything is contingent on the health of players who have injury histories. And that's concerning because if Kellen Moore at this point has half his offense, similar to what Clint Kubiak here, like in my opinion, this is a team that's going to be vying for a top 5 pick if that's the case.
I think if their team's healthy, they're going to be vying for a top 5 pick. This might be me being a hater. I just think the Saints stink this year. Even if they're healthy, I don't think the O-line's good. I like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, but nobody else scares me on the offense. Tyler Shuck is a 26-year-old rookie, so he's experienced, right? He's a veteran, if you will, but he also gives us at least 2 Levis meme throws per game. So are we going to get those when we play them? I'm not sure. Then you look at the defense, not super, super inspiring, and getting older on that side of the ball as well. So I like that they have 2 young tackles, I think, that are going to be good for them in the future. But everything else, I really don't see it. If we were able to beat them last year, and this was with Alvin Kamara having like 150 yards on the ground, this is going to be a very disappointing one to lose. I would say that. This should be a game that the Panthers, if you want to be a serious franchise, when you're looking at it on your calendar, your schedule, even if it's a division game, you should be circling this and saying, all right, we got this one. Let's move on to whoever it is next week. Like that's the kind of mentality our team needs to cultivate going forward this season. And I think in this rough stretch here, this is a welcome game, a home game, a division game that we have to take advantage of because the next game after that is another division game, but it's not at home and it's against the Falcons.
Yeah, and similar to the comments that we made prior, we're going to see what their additions do on the defensive side and what our additions do on the defensive side. Maybe the defenses improve or regress from the first time they play to the second time. But again, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what those matchups are going to be because the first time the Panthers played each other last year, it was Andy Dalton versus Kirk Cousins. And then the second time it's Bryce Young and Michael Penix. So there's a lot that could change. Players get injured all the time. Could change the dynamics of what a matchup looked like in the first game to the second game. And so this is all going to be very hesitant based on what you saw the first time, what changed since then. And the nice thing I'll say about this division opponent in particular for both the fan bases and the teams, it's like a 4-hour drive. And so this is one of those things that at this point in the year, you just got back from Lambeau, you had a home game, you just drive down 85, you're back home. And for me, that's important, that 2-week little buffer, because it's the next stretch of games before the bye week that you're really going to have to pack it in and be prepared because neither of them are gimme games.
For sure. And that starts with week 12 at San Francisco. We don't have fond memories of being in that particular stadium. But at San Francisco on Monday night, your Panthers have a primetime game this season. No, I'm not counting the game that was in Munich last year. That was at 9 a.m. That's not prime time. This is at 8 p.m. or at night. Monday Night Football. We are 13-9 all time against the Niners, and I thought that's a large number of games until I remember when we joined the league, we were in their division. So quite a few games against them. This is our first Monday night game since week 2 of 2023. We obviously lose that one against the Saints. We have a 10-8 record on Monday nights, positive record against San Francisco. And the Panthers' first ever Monday Night Football game was against the 49ers. It was in Charlotte. We lost that game, so maybe we can avenge that one. My big story point here is Brock Purdy going to turn it up after that extension he got a couple of days ago? Because if not, this could be another team like we talked about with the Dolphins that could be looking kind of rough.
I want to pose this as a hypothetical because I'm curious the leash that Kyle Shanahan has at this point. He comes in to San Francisco, a devastated franchise from what it had been with Jim Harbaugh less than like half a decade prior. Sean McDermott, same time, comes into the Buffalo Bills, who hadn't been to the playoffs in like 20 years and has had them in the playoffs, I think, every single year except one. And obviously, everybody has their faults with McDermott, XYZ. But with Kyle Shanahan, there's this ebbs and flows, and obviously it's tied to the fact that you're not able to find a quarterback. But the kind of wrap up this rabbit trail, my question to you is, if Brock Purdy gets injured for whatever reason, and you're stuck with Mac Jones, who really is a backup quarterback. We saw what he was able to do with Jacksonville, Brian Thomas. He might be able to put up the yardage numbers that you see, but in terms of just efficient play that wins you games, I don't think Mac Jones is that caliber of player. If this is a team that's picking again close to the top 10 or in the top 10, like at what point is the leash for Kyle Shanahan just like no more? Like you either don't have say in the personnel, like we're turning this all over to John Lynch or a new general manager, or like you're done, because like that's not winning football.
I think when you don't have a franchise QB, getting to not one but two Super Bowls, leading late in those Super Bowls, buys you a lot of real estate. I think let me ask you this. When you look at the expectations for the Bills versus the 49ers, I think with the quarterbacks in mind, you would have much higher expectations for the Bills. And yet the Bills can't make it to the Super Bowl.
If the Bills, and I know this is a huge hypothetical, but the Bills have gotten to the point where the only team that has stood in between them and the Super Bowl, and I would say this, and this is for the Ravens as well. I think these are two franchises that really the only roadblock they faced is Patrick Mahomes. The 49ers, every time they play Patrick Mahomes, they lose in the playoffs. And it has been the Super Bowl with these gauntlet rosters. I think if those two other teams that we're talking about with the Bills and the Ravens, who have had perennial, consistent success, like they would be in the Super Bowl. They would be in those games. And I think just because they play in the AFC, that is kind of been to their detriment. And so that's the only difference there. For me, it's just not continued success for Kyle Shanahan. And you just paid a guy $53 million. And if he goes down, he's got now an injury history. And you're worried about, okay, do you have an answer at that position, which has been the question since 2017? Like this has been going on almost a decade now.
This is what I'll say. When did Purdy get his chance to shine, right? Due to an injury. And who did Shanahan reportedly want in that draft trade up? What was that, 2021? It was Mac Jones. So I don't think Purdy and Mac Jones are that far apart. Obviously, I think Purdy's better. But I think he can make some stuff happen with Mac Jones. And with the 49ers in mind, I know we're getting off on a tangent, but if you look at their schedule this year, it's the opposite of rough. It's maybe the easiest schedule I have ever seen, especially down the stretch. Like we're talking the Panthers, who were 5-12 last year, are one of their harder games down the stretch, other than the division opponent Rams. But this is a team that like very well could be the 1 seed going into the playoffs this year if everything breaks right for them. Excuse me. So the leash question is interesting. We can revisit that on like a future pod because I kind of agree with you. Sustained playoff success has worked for McDermott, but he and Josh, it's not just him, it's Josh Allen too. They're little brothers to the Chiefs. It's the same thing with the Ravens. It's the same thing with the Niners, like you're talking about too. But I think getting to the Super Bowl does buy you an extended leash, like you're talking about with Shanahan. With that in mind, we play the Rams the very next week. I talked about how that would be one of the Niners' harder games. It's going to be one of our harder games as well. At least we're hosting the Rams. We have a 12-10 record against them all time. But that one's going to be rough. The Rams looked like they were firing on all cylinders at the end of last year. They looked really rough to start the year, but they turned it around, almost beat the Eagles in the playoffs. It came short because Stafford air-mailed a throw. But this is a team that I think probably should be the favorite to win that division. So it'll be a good test for us late in the year if they're relatively healthy at that point.
If you want to make an argument, and the whole tangent on the 49ers was dependent on the health of their team and how they finish. That game is going to be rough in Santa Clara. And after that one and facing a revamped defensive line, you're facing another revamped defensive line with the Rams. Their offensive line is one of the better ones in the league. But when we talk about like wins above replacement, at least for the Los Angeles Rams, there are two players whose health is going to be very, I would say, important from a Vegas win total, Vegas spread on this game is Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua. If those guys aren't playing, this is like you go from maybe a top 5, top 10 offense to a bottom 5 offense. And it's very hard outside of pulling like a Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson to get any kind of pull of that from just those kind of players. So to see that kind of swing just because of those two players being on and off the field is going to be huge. And they have injury histories. This is later in the year. There is nothing that's a given at this point in the season. So like you said last year, they were able to find ways to make things work, but they were healthy. And that's going to be the biggest question about this game, because we could go into this game as underdogs or we could go into the game as favorites. And it's going to be dependent on if Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua are putting their helmets on that Sunday.
For sure. And like you're saying, this is week 13, right? This isn't a week 3 matchup where everybody should be healthy. The Rams' struggles at the early part of last year, you can attribute that directly to Puka Nacua not being on the field during that stretch. But as far as like stretches of the season go, we just talked about it, the Cowboys through the Rams, I think you got to steal 2 or 3 of those if you want to feel good about growing as a young team, because after that, we have our bye week, week 14, latest in the league. I think only a couple of other teams have that bye week. But after that, then if we're in the playoff hunt or the NFC South division hunt, this is when the grind really, really starts. We play at New Orleans week 15. So division opponent going to a division opponent. We talked about how poor they are and how at this point there's going to be key players on both sides injured. I just don't think they're going to be able to put up enough of a fight, but this is at a division opponent, so anything's on the table.
I remain quiet on trying to project offense and defensive play callers because of the fumbling I had with Shane Waldron last year and just trying to project kind of what that success looks like at a next stop. But we saw Kellen Moore and Brandon Staley with the Chargers with what was arguably, at least you had more star talent, I thought, on that roster at those given junctions. And so now you're coming to the Saints, and it's like, does that coach pairing learn anything from their last experience, or are we just going to get the Los Angeles Chargers in New Orleans? And that did not result in good things. And so at this point in the year, if they do not have the locker room won, and they're losing that, then this is a game where we could very easily feel good about ourselves leaving New Orleans compared to the last time that we went down to New Orleans. So I would say, especially with how young this team is, how young this roster is, the Panthers aren't going to forget what happened last year in week 1. So if there's a chance to drop 60 points on a team that has a potential kind of, I would say, head coaching disadvantage, this is the game to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I was going to say this could be a reversal of fortunes, right? Yeah. I talked earlier how we started the year in New Orleans last year, 47-10, just annihilation of our team. This could, it would feel really good to go into, is it still Mercedes-Benz? Because there's 2 Mercedes-Benz stadiums now.
I think it is, yeah.
Or it might be
It's
Caesars,
like them in Atlanta. It's
to go in there and drop 30, 35 plus on them would feel really, really good, especially because the next 3 games are a division game sandwich. So the next week, we're back at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is the first time we'll be seeing them all year, 25-24 against them all time. So we talked about in the past how we always beat up on them, and now it's a little bit of a reversal. This is our chance to get back. Last year, we almost beat them. It took a Chuba Hubbard fumble in overtime. It took Eddie Pinheiro missing, I think, 3 field goals and an extra point. And it took a lot of fourth down cowardice from Dave Canales and the analytics staff to go for field goals instead of going for it in a season where we had nothing to lose. But we've ranted on that for a lot of minutes last season. But if you want to make a statement in the division, if you want to have the chance to win the division, this has to be a game that you win. I know that they just destroyed us when we were in Tampa, but it was close when it was here. And with an improved team and with a coaching staff that's new in Tampa, you have to take advantage of it, and you have to get this one done.
This is a must win if you're in the playoff hunt. And what we talked about with the schedule, games like the Packers, games like the Dolphins, the early stretch, obviously the Saints coming out of the bye. These are games where if you win them, the games you're supposed to, and pull off the ones that are somewhat of an upset, it makes this game so much more special. And because of exactly where I was saying this being a younger team and remembering what happened last year, this team still has the blood in their mouth from this game. Like, this went to overtime. There were multiple opportunities on both sides to win the game because in the Panthers' favor, Baker Mayfield got knocked out of it quickly, came back, threw an interception, and that's what got the Panthers back in that game in the second half. So there were opportunities given and taken from both sides. Obviously, the Chuba Hubbard fumble was horrific, but a play before that, Adam Thielen snatching a one-handed grab the move the chains. So this is one of those games that I think the Panthers will find a way to win just because of the emotional toll last year took. And so to have kind of that revenge coming out of the bye back-to-back weeks is, I think, a good segue into, I would say, one of the bigger non-division rivalries that the Panthers have, or at least have had over the past 10, 15 years, and that's the Seattle Seahawks. And it'll be very interesting to see Mike Macdonald and the Seattle Seahawks going up against Dave Canales and Dan Morgan, who previously were in Seattle, obviously underneath Pete Carroll, but Pete Carroll is part of the process of hiring Mike Macdonald. So again, just similar veins of thought, schools of thought, to see another team that wants to play defense and run the ball, a matchup against Sam Bradford. Wow, flash from the past. Sam Darnold as their quarterback, and him being an ex-Panther with that trade with the Jets a couple years ago. I think there's some interesting narratives with this game, and it could go a multitude of ways, and I think it will really depend on really what comes to fruition this year, how fast are rookies able to pick it up. And we may not even be seeing Darnold at this point. Jalen Milroe may be the guy. He could steal the show in Seattle and really take the league by storm. But again, later in the season, a lot could happen in between the start and as we wrap up the schedule.
Hopefully, if Darnold is still the starter, this could be one of his classic Patton pumpkin games that he puts forth toward the end of the season, as you so beautifully coined it last year. But like you're saying, a lot of smaller behind-the-scenes narratives, right, with Canales and Morgan, Mike Macdonald. We don't have really any relation to Mike Macdonald, but two teams that, like you're saying, want to win the trenches and want to run the ball. I think that's what it's going to come down to. Which run game is still more impactful at the end of the year? And lucky for us, I think we have one of the better run games in the league now with Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle, and drafting Trevor Etienne in the 4th round last year. So hopefully our run game is still strong and potent at that point. You mentioned how the Buccaneers game is a must win if you're in the playoffs. I think it's a must win regardless, even if you're not in the playoff hunt, because the Seahawks game I think could be rough. And then we go to Tampa Bay to end the year in week 18. I think, 2 years ago, we ended the season in Tampa Bay, right? That we put up an offer. DJ Chark Bryce Young had a great scramble, hit DJ Chark in the middle of the open field.
That was in Carolina.
That was in Carolina. I thought it was in Tampa, but
no, because we played Tampa a few weeks earlier, and Bryce Young had was it a 2-point conversion or a touchdown?
It was the 2-point. That was, and it was raining in that game. But you're right, it was in Carolina. DJ Chark fumbles through the back of the end zone.
What a bum!
And Eddie Pinheiro misses a field goal as well. We lost the game 9-0. Both of those scores happened. Could have been a 10-9 win. You never know. But I think that's going to be a game that we can't look at and say, oh, this should be a good, favorable matchup for the Panthers. I think the Buccaneers will have locked in at this point and will be able to get it done in that stadium. So it makes the previous Buccaneers game all the more important to be able to steal one, split the division series, and hopefully stay in playoff contention, because to end the season in Tampa, I think is not an easy task by any means.
It isn't. But if at this point where we've talked about you're able to find a way to sweep the Saints, you split with the Falcons, you win this first matchup against the Buccaneers, you're looking at a 4-1 start in the division and could be playing for the division title in that last week of the season. Obviously, you brought up the time a couple years ago when Sam Darnold and the Panthers, it was underneath Steve Wilkes at the time. You go into Tampa Bay and you get
against
mollywopped
Brady
by Tom Brady and Mike Evans. So I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here, but that's where we could see a similar echo chamber there. But again, like we talked about, we open the season against the Jaguars. You find a way to win that game. You know what the history is there. We talked about it at the top of the episode. You can look back at a game like the New England Patriots. That was a statement game for Cam Newton and the Panthers back in 2017 when they made their playoff push, and being able to and beat Tom Brady and find ways to win with guys like Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funchess. The Green Bay game that I've circled a bunch. One of my favorite trips up the Lambeau was back in 2008, where D'Angelo Williams had like 4 rushing touchdowns in that game. Just an absolute stud. Steve Smith came alive with a electric kind of game-sealing catch towards the end of it. San Francisco, as much as I talked about really just Kyle Shanahan and some of the implications that he may face in the next couple of off seasons if they don't play up to par, but the game that we should be talking about is back in 2013 when we had a defensive slugfest against them. Cam Newton versus Colin Kaepernick, a 10-9 game where we found a way to – actually, I don't even know if it was 10-9. Actually, it was 10-9 because it was Graham Gano kicked the 1 field goal and D'Angelo Williams had a touchdown earlier in the game. But those kind of games where we had statement wins in each of those years that we went to the playoffs, that would be a cool echo chamber to go, okay, we lost the last time when we were in this position. We aren't going to lose this time. And if you're able to sweep the Bucs, win the division, and that's how your season ends, you could lose first round of the playoffs. That's a huge success, and it shows that you were able to win games you weren't the year before. And that's the kind of step in progress we want to see from this team. Obviously, playoffs would be a huge step for this team, but just playing to be in those positions is going to be very telling about how this young core is going to respond to adversity.
For sure. Meaningful football in November, December, January, meaningful football on the road and protecting your home turf. I think you can break this schedule down into 3 stretches here. If you're looking on YouTube, the first 4 games, or first 5, I know you're more favorable about the Dolphins than I am, but the first 4 or 5 games, that's when you can hit the ground running against opponents that are definitely on the weaker half of the NFL, right? And then from Dallas to the LA Rams, that's an 8-game stretch. That's where you find some of that adversity. You go up against opponents that are supposed to beat you, but how are you going to respond to that? That's how you got to deal with that. Hopefully you can steal a couple there. And then after the bye week, those 4 games, if we're in the playoff hunt, even if we're not in the playoff hunt and the season has just gone poorly, you still need to take 2 of those games, in my opinion, to show that you can play meaningful and win meaningful football in December and January. I think the last one will be in January. It usually is. But that's kind of how I see the season. 3 stretches, 2 of which are pretty favorable, but that one in the middle, you got to find a way to win. We need more of the Chiefs and close Buccaneers games. If we're going to lose, we need more of those. If we're going to win, we need more of those gritty wins like we had against the Cardinals, against the Giants. That was a horrible game to watch, but the Giants game 17 to 14 or 20 to 17 went to overtime. We forced a fumble and got the game-winning field goal. Like those are the kind of the things you need. I don't ever want to see a 10-9 game again because I think we've moved beyond that era of football, or a 9-3 game like I talked about with the Bills earlier, but you got to find a way to stay in these games and win them. And I don't know that we'll make the playoffs. I actually don't think we will. My initial prediction looking at this is 8-9. But even if we go 8-9 and win good competitive games against some of the better teams, that's a right step, or a step in the right direction for this young team.
It reminds me of this year, as much as I have brought up like playoffs and playing meaningful games down the stretch. And we're very hopeful that this team will be in that position. I think this more reminds me of 2012, where you're coming off a lot of hype from the year before. Bryce Young was starting to piece it together. You're adding some really, really intriguing pieces to both sides of the ball. But it sometimes takes a little bit of time for all that to gel and come together. And so I keep referencing 2012, but Ryan Khalil had kind of taken out, I think, a newspaper article, wrote something about how the team was going to make the playoffs, and we fell flat at 7-9. But what really, I think, mattered in terms of propelling into 2013 and what that season became for the franchise was we learned how to win games down the stretch. And one of those games was hosting the Atlanta Falcons at home. And Cam Newton had the big 70-yard touchdown run, one of the most epic plays of this team's history. And that was one of those statement wins down the stretch. So what we talked about out of the bye, the season could be going poorly, but find a way to beat the Saints on the road. Find a way to beat the Buccaneers at home. Like, those are really what I think are going to be the pivotal games heading into next year in 2026, when I think the playoffs are going to become a bigger topic of a discussion around this team.
If I recall correctly, the 2012 season, we started at 3-9, I believe. And there were talks about Ron Rivera being fired after it. And we won the last four. It was, or maybe we started 4-9 and won 3 of our last 4, something like that. But we finished the season, and that's what I need to see us do in 2025. It sounds crazy to say 2025, but that's where we're at. Last year we won 2 of our final 3 games, and both of them went to overtime. I'd like to see us not have the worst defense of all time and win games in regulation when you score 30 or more points without any turnovers. But we will have to see how the new look defense performs. I think that's going to do it for us for our initial schedule breakdown. Now that we're in the kind of the dead period of the NFL calendar, we're going to have to find some creative topics for episodes going down the line. I think we have some good ones lined up, at least for the next couple of weeks. So we'll be back on Thursday to talk about, are we going to do duos on Thursday, or are we going to do QB room?
It's a good question, because we're going to be doing Mount Rushmores for different positions. So we'll come at it a different angle come Thursday, but it will be regarding either a quarterback or skill position. And that's very vague, but I think that's the direction we're heading. But do we want to talk about Purrfect Takes? Do you have any takes about the schedule, man? A game that we're locking in at this point in the year? You're trying to hop off the air without having any skin in the game.
Yeah, I didn't have a take, so I was trying to sneak by you there. But I don't want to pick like an easy one like the Cardinals, because I feel like that'd be kind of lame. So you know what? I'm going to lock in the Jets game. I know I said it's the most boring game that we're going to have. I know I said it, that's the one that I have the least skin in the game. But now maybe if I lock in that we're going to win up in East Rutherford, maybe that'll make me force that to be my main screen instead of red zone for that 1 p.m. window. But yeah, let me lock in the Jets as a week 7 win. And that's one of the wins that the Panthers get during that competitive and difficult stretch in the middle of the year.
I like it. I was torn between 2 games, but in order as a Panthers fan, for really this year to kick off the way we need it to, you have to go down to Jacksonville and win. And so I think, and the color, the jersey colors haven't even been dropped in terms of what we're doing what week, but I think we'll end up wearing, and we have against the Jaguars multiple times, our light blue jerseys, at least the tops. I don't know what we're doing with the pants, but we're going to go down to Jacksonville in our light blues, and we're going to find a way to win. Jacksonville didn't do a lot to address their defensive line in terms of stopping the run. And I think Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle will go off and have a huge game and really set the tone. And then on the other side of the ball, I don't think the Jaguars did enough for their offensive line. And our revamped defensive line will take advantage. And by winning both sides of the trenches, I think that'll catapult us to a week 1 victory and hopefully put us on the trajectory of a playoff berth and potential Super Bowl run.
Well, you heard it here first. Stephen Patton has locked in a Super Bowl appearance for the Carolina Panthers. But now I think it's time for us to hop off the airway. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We will be back Thursday with a vague topic, TBD. But until then, keep pounding.